They say the woods don't talk. In Newaygo, Michigan, they lied. On a humid night in July 1989, 18-year-old Shannon Siders stepped into a car with familiar faces under a tired street lamp. By sunrise, her bed was cold. Weeks later, a hunter cut through the Manistee National Forest and peered into a shallow pit locals whispered about, the hole in the woods. What he found ripped a small town open. A bright life snuffed out. A crime scene that looked like it had been cleaned by time itself. And one detail that wasn't there at all. The senior class ring Shannon wore everywhere, engraved S 89. Gone. You think you know evil when you see it? In Newaygo, evil smiled at the gas station, signed church programs, and handed out missing posters. For 25 years, people nodded back to monsters and slept 2 doors down from a secret. Rumors simmered. Polygraphs soothed. Evidence sat bagged, quiet as breath in a freezer. But the forest remembers what men forget. Dust remembers. Threads remember. When science finally caught up, old hairs gave up new names, and a small circle of metal surfaced like a confession you could hold in your palm. The truth didn't knock. It kicked the door in at 5 a.m. 8s. Tonight, on Cold Case Files, we follow the case that refused to die. A father who would not stop knocking, detectives who treated silence like a witness, and a town forced to admit the monsters weren't in the shadows. They were waving from the sidewalk. If you've ever felt a chill in a place that's supposed to be safe, this story is yours. Stay with me. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, drop where you're watching from, and tell us, do you think justice has an expiration date? Because in Newaygo, it didn't. It just took its time, and then it walked straight. The woods do not go silent just because the town pretends they do. We stay in Newaygo, down by the Muskegon River that sets everyone's pulse like a slow metronome, past bait shops with hand-painted hours, across Main Street where 4 pickup trucks loop a steady orbit. The Manistee National Forest presses at the edges, red pines in ranks until the wind lifts their tops and reorders them. The camera follows that whisper into a second-floor apartment above the hardware store, where boxes make canyons and fresh paint still smells like promise. Shannon Siders lives here now, 18 and bright in a way that isn't loud. She arranges the future in small, stubborn ways. Textbooks stacked like stepping stones, a brochure for Grand Valley State under a magnet, a jar of tip money labeled August. Her senior ring, S 89, clicks against the glass when she reaches, a tiny bell that says, I finished something, and I'm not done. Bob, who works nights at the bottling plant, calls the new place the champagne floor, because during move-in, everything fizzes, tape, talk, the relief of things landing in a room that is finally theirs. Tonight, he chooses proud over protective. 2 pizzas arrive. Jennifer, the best friend since scraped knees, kicks off her shoes and claims a milk crate as a throne. The housewarming is modest and bright, cheap food, too much talking, a floor lamp without a shade that makes the room look like rehearsal. Shannon pulls Jennifer into a silly living room dance. The frame is wide enough to catch Bob trying not to smile. For one breath, grief is not the dominant color in this family. When a pan clatters from a box labeled dishes, they clap as if a drummer nailed the fill. At 10:30 p.m., Bob checks the deadbolt, kisses his daughter's hair, and tells the girls to keep it down, half warning, half benediction. He leaves his door open a thumb's width, a compromise between boundaries and vigilance. The apartment exhales into the quiet you only hear in small towns. A lone car rinsing the street with white noise, a neighbor's late show monologue, a box fan pulling pine air through the screen. Shannon's future is practical and luminous. She isn't chasing a cinematic escape. She's plotting tuition, penciling hours, trusting that pages add up if you keep turning them. Ambition has made her selective with her yeses. She isn't seriously dating. She keeps her circle warm and small. The ring on her right hand is both trophy and tool. Proof of work, promise of more. They aren't ready for sleep. The night feels elastic, one good choice from stretching longer. Shoes on, door cracked. The stairwell smells like dust and afternoon rain. The convenience store is 2 blocks, fluorescent mercy, and air-conditioned forgiveness. The clerk nods the way clerks do at kids who have aged in front of their counter. 2 colas, peanut butter crackers, neon gum for the bit. The bell over the door rings like a cheap blessing. You know this kind of summer, the air thick with pine and certainty. Shannon walks with a forward lean, as if the future has a headwind and she's glad to meet it. Newaygo has also taught her that familiar faces extend your safety. Refusing a ride from someone you've known since fireworks behind the baseball field can read like an insult. Normative trust isn't naivety, it's culture. Bob has taught caution, yes, but also belief. Hold the door, look people in the eye, expect decency until proven otherwise. They turn back toward the apartment. Streetlights pool in soft circles that overlap like Venn diagrams. A porch radio narrates baseball to a moth. A dog thumps a fence in its sleep. Then the sedan appears the way sedans do in towns like this. Already known before it arrives. The engine note is familiar, the silhouette too, and the men inside are the sort who will later bring casseroles to vigils and shake hands at church doors. A window slides down, a name floats out, an invitation that sounds casual enough to be kindness. Jennifer will later tell investigators there was a pause, half a heartbeat where instinct tried to interrupt habit. The town's expectations bridge the gap. Shannon waves, the loose, untroubled wave of someone who still believes the perimeter holds. She leans into the passenger seat. The upholstery takes her weight and keeps the record. The ring catches the street lamp and throws a tiny comet into the warm air. Doors click with the ordinary authority of doors. Upstairs, the hallway nightlight draws a weak trapezoid under Bob's door. He sleeps the way night shift fathers learn to, on the surface, tuned to the frequency of a key in a lock. The clock will reach the hour when worry whistles, but not yet. Right now, he belongs to the faith that morning is uncomplicated. Outside, amber light washes the bricks. The sedan signals and merges with the thin traffic of a weeknight almost over. Tires murmur along a curb still drying from rain. They pass the hardware store, the diner, the bank. The car noses toward the edge where neighborhoods lose their names and the timberline gathers into a wall of dark. Above them, the street lamp flickers once, catching the engraving S 89 and sending it skittering across chrome and glass into the dark. Ambition is a vector. It points and it pulls. Trust is a vector too. In Shannon, those lines meet and make a corridor through the night. She isn't careless. She is consistent with a place that taught her, for 18 summers, that recognizable equals safe. The town hums with the same conviction, a choir that doesn't yet hear the wrong note. The forest hears everything and answers nothing. The door shuts. The sedan rolls. The forest starts keeping books. The apartment looked the same at dawn, but it felt wrong. Bob woke as night shift fathers do, one ear tuned to the deadbolt, one eye to the clock. At 7, Z0A. M. The quiet pressed, not rested. He tapped Shannon's door. No answer. Her bed lay smooth, A cassette spine glinted. The tiny dish was empty because she never took the ring off. He said her name, louder, then listened to a silence that organized itself into dread. Jennifer picked up on the second ring. "She come back with you?" The question snagged. "No," Jennifer said. "She got a ride with the brothers." The word landed like metal. Reputation is different when your daughter is late. Bob tried the optimistic edits, dead battery, friend's couch, surprise morning shift until he saw her diner apron folded over a chair. Optimism evaporated. He grabbed his keys and a jacket he did not need. By 8:10 he was at the Newaygo County Sheriff's Department, palms on the counter, voice steady. Deputy Mark Thorne received him with a legal pad. Details tumbled. Street lamp, familiar sedan, casual wave. Thorne dispatched units to Canvas, Maine, radioed the hospital, entered Shannon as missing with the state post. When Jennifer arrived, pale, she walked the night beat by beat. Housewarming, soda run, the window slipping down, the names spoken like neighbors, the wave that meant courtesy more than choice. By noon, the brothers sat in separate rooms, mirrors of water cups and chairs. The 1989 ritual unfolded. A recorder's red eye, statements shaped to fit the form. Both said they drove Shannon as a favor, dropped her near her building, saw a porch light and TV, heard a dog. Plausible because it used neighborhood wallpaper. They volunteered for polygraphs. In a small town, the offer read like good faith. Arrangements were made. He followed procedure's rails. Consent to search the car was granted. The sedan smelled of stale smoke and pine. Technicians swabbed handles, lifted smudged prints, tweezed fibers from seams, photographed scuffs that might be travel or trouble. The trunk offered ordinary inventory. Jack, blanket, a coil of nylon rope, a rolling bottle of motor oil. No blood coaxed by luminol, no hair eager to gleam into meaning under a lamp. You expect labs to roar, 1989 evidence mostly whispers. Eights. In Newaygo, denial wasn't laziness, it was armor. If evil looked like men who donated to raffles and helped lift a sofa, recognizing it meant rewriting how to stand in the grocery line. People chose survivable stories. Maybe Shannon cooled off somewhere. Maybe she crashed on a couch. Maybe she'd walk in by afternoon with a sheepish grin. Even officers who remembered the brothers as loudmouthed teens felt the gravity of the "it can't be them" reflex, the mind bargains when proof is thin. Thorne answered bargaining with checklists. He confirmed Bob's shift at the bottling plant and logged calls. Patrols swept river turnouts and the undeveloped edge. Volunteers posted flyers on corkboards built for yard sales and choir rehearsals. At the apartment, neighbors came to sit, then stood because sitting made waiting louder. Jennifer gave a second statement, slower, with room for tone. She described posture as keenly as time, the almost invisible hitch in Shannon's shoulders before the wave that read as fairness to familiar faces. Asked whether Shannon would refuse a ride, she faltered. "It would have felt rude," she said. Culture spoke through her. Small-town norms had turned risk into routine, painted harmless. Word about the polygraphs seeped into town like balm. "They passed," someone said at the diner. Forks eased. At the hardware counter, an old-timer declared, "Jerks, not killers." Meanwhile, Thorne rebuilt the timeline. The route matched parts of the story. Minutes wavered where no clock had watched. A neighbor recalled a sweep of headlights, not the honk one brother claimed. Inconsistencies were sand, not stone, shifting, never firm. The lab did what it could with what it had. Microscope spoke in caveats. Consistent with, not inconsistent with. DNA belonged to the future and the movies, not to a county budget. Thorne did the unglamorous task that would matter most later: sealing, logging, and storing with reverence. Evidence bags were labeled like letters to whoever the case would need in 20 years. Present tense justice wanted a sprint. The work offered a slow archive. Bob would not go home because home was where waiting echoed. Oh, Thorne told him to rest, to eat, to keep the line clear. Bob nodded the way people nod when advice is a kindness they cannot yet perform. When he finally left, it was to sit by the apartment door, the place miracles logically start. Without certainty, rumor built bridges from scrap. Someone said Shannon was seen at a Grand Rapids gas station. Another swore she'd argued with a boy. Someone else insisted she'd asked for a ride in a different car entirely. Thorne followed each lead to its wall and flipped on the light. Nothing. He called the brothers back for clarifications that sounded like the first answers pressed through new molds. They were courteous, bored, ordinary. Night took the town back and laid its hush on porches and yards. Patrol cars wrote slow cursive on side streets. The river kept its beat. In evidence, envelopes nested within boxes. On a desk under fluorescent hum, the case file thickened by a few pages, enough to promise work, not enough to change the story. What the day needed, it could not have. Time. Only time waited. Weeks stretch. Labor Day brings movement no one wanted. Labor Day had the sound of late summer. Chainsaws far off, cicadas turning the heat into a pulse, an occasional dirt bike between pines. A hunter followed a faint game trail, boots worrying the loose sand that passes for soil in red pine. He wasn't looking for anything but sign, scuffed needles, pellets, a feather on bark. The forest opened into a shallow depression, locals called, without ceremony, the hole in the woods. What he saw first was out of category. A color that didn't belong. He stepped closer, then stopped, the way your body throws a handbrake before your mind agrees. A limb. The pale of skin where the earth had not yet reclaimed it. He backed away, steadied his breathing, and found a scrap of signal. The call to the state police was clipped. I think I found a body. 8. Deputies flagged the road and held the approach. The first detective on scene felt the unwelcome snap as focus narrowed, a square of ground, a handful of angles, a duty to see without looking away. Crime scene tape stitched yellow through red trunks. Photographs began, then the slow, careful work. Layer by layer, brush by brush, bag by numbered bag. The body lay on its side among a spill of needles, gravity making geometry where there should have been personhood. Clothing was present, disturbed, dirt hazed. Insects had been busy, animals mercifully less so. Nothing theatrical, only brutality and time. A necklace chain, kinked. No wallet. And, almost immediately, one absence that spoke like a shout to those who knew. The right hand was bare. The senior ring Shannon wore like punctuation was nowhere visible. You can't unsee a forest that gives something back. The medical examiner arrived with a moving quiet, routine balanced against reverence. Field notes first. Lividity patterns, insect activity, ambient temperature in the low 70s. Measurements, angles, coordinates logged so exactly the Earth could be refound years later. The body was bagged with care and conveyed, but the scene was not done. Not yet. Trace technicians treated the clearing as a reluctant witness. Kneeling on foam pads, they lifted hairs from fabric with single-use tape, sealed microfibers like messages, and cored tiny soil samples where scuff marks braided. A torn thread at a seam, a dark filament on a pant leg. Everything that might speak once chemistry caught up. Each envelope got a number, a date, a signature, a chain of custody line as serious as a prayer. Back at the lab, the autopsy was straight lines and stillness. Under fluorescent calm, the story gathered edges. Evidence of blunt force trauma to the head. Lacerations patterned by a hard, irregular surface. Depressed fractures radiating from impact points. Hemorrhaging consistent with repeated blows. Defensive injuries lived along the arms and hands. Bruises, abrasions, suggesting struggle. There were findings consistent with sexual assault. The ME dictated in a tone that neither glowed nor chilled. Cause of death. Blunt force trauma. Manner. Homicide. No toxins in prelim screens. No distinctive transfer patterns to brand a weapon. Enough certainty to anchor rage. Not enough to name a man. In the evidence room, the detective who had watched Bob age hour by hour took the bag containing the ring finger's photograph and wrote, in his own hand, a second note in the file. Ring absent. Private detail. Do not release. It was a tactic and a vow. If anyone mentioned that ring in the years to come, they would be either family or the person who had kept it like a trophy, or someone the keeper had tried to impress. The cognitive load of holding back a single truth is heavier than a speech can admit. Investigators must speak to the public in sentences lit by empathy, to families in sentences weighted with care, to suspects in sentences designed like traps. The ring became a fulcrum. Keep it quiet, and the balance might tilt when the right mouth tried to brag. Leak it, and you lose your calibration tool, the detail that sorts memory from performance. Meanwhile, the forest was still a partner you could not brief. Teams grid-searched outward from the depression, moving slow enough to notice a cigarette filter lodged in duff, fast enough to stay ahead of weather. They logged a crushed beer can from another summer, a scrap of tarp thread on a twig, a partial tire impression baked into a sandy patch that the first drizzle would erase. Every maybe went into a bag. Oh, most would later be just what they looked like. Nothing. Jennifer was told only what kindness required. Bob heard cause and manner, and nothing about jewelry. He nodded as if agreement could rearrange any of it. Grief rearranged him instead. At night, he took a chair by the window, the ring of the streetlight reflecting off glass where a ring should have been reflecting off skin. Reporters called. The sheriff's office spoke carefully. Remains located in a wooded area. Identification pending. Investigation active. Tips arrived tangled around fear and attention. Most led nowhere. A few led back to the same names nobody wanted to say out loud so soon. The file thickened as if mass could become momentum. Photographs. Autopsy. Logs. Maps that showed a depression as a neat oval, a simplification the actual ground refused. In the center of a copy, someone penciled, ring, then crossed it out and underlined. Instead, a date. Discipline held. Secret served the slow. At the clearing, rain finally came, dressing the scene in the mercy of erasure. A week later, you could stand there and, without tape and flags, mistake it for any other pocket of the Manistee. Same light, same resin, same breath of iron in the dirt. Memory turns ordinary topography into map. Files get boxed, but grief learns your address. The forest did not keep the date, but Bob did. After the recovery and the words no parent should repeat, cause, manner, nothing about the ring, he began the quiet labor of continuing. He kept Shannon's room as a working idea, not a shrine. Dusted shelves on Saturdays, turned a cassette each week so a different title faced outward, straightened the brochure for a college no one would call. He vacuumed in careful rows, as if order could anchor time that had slipped its leash. By the first winter, the neighbors learned endurance. A casserole left with no insistence, an envelope in the mailbox, a bottle of de-icer on the stoop. Bob answered with gratitude and few words. Routine was the solvent that didn't erase. Spring wrote a softer ritual. Near the trailhead, people gathered with candles and paper collars to keep the wind from chewing the flame. The sheriff said brief words. A pastor prayed short because grief despises speeches. They walked into the pines until the river changed its voice, then stood while wax scented the air. Jennifer spoke the same memory every year. The street lamp, the wave, a ring's flash that should have been a guarantee and wasn't. Each year the crowd thinned. Dozens became a dozen, then the faithful. Jennifer, Amy Bonner, 2 retired teachers, the bait shop owner who swore Shannon once celebrated getting the last pack of grape gum. A new deputy sometimes stood at the edge, hands folded, face reading a file he had only just inherited. Bob tried not to treat the shrinking head count as a verdict. He told himself the town still felt it. It had simply lost the language. Inside the sheriff's office, case notes migrated shelves like leaves downstream. New cupboards, new tabs, printouts stapled to copies whose ink had faded. Detectives rotated. One transferred, one retired, one arrived with a wedding ring and a baby photo on the desk. Each brought a different highlighter color. Each circled same shapes: knight, sedan, brothers, hole, ring, and found the outline unchanged. Meanwhile, the brothers did not flee. They chose lives with as few corners as possible. Predictable shifts, seasonal side work, church on alternating Sundays, groceries on Wednesdays, conversations limited to weather and scores. Their camouflage was banal. People stop staring when nothing new happens. They avoided fights, loud opinions, sudden trips. The paint dulled. The car aged. Nothing dramatic, nothing memorable. You've nodded at neighbors without knowing what they carry. The town adapted to the ache the way a body compensates for a wound. Shifting weight, favoring what still works, pretending until pretending becomes the only way to move. Parents adjusted curfews and called it common sense. Health teachers told the story in careful euphemisms. The hole in the woods turned into a dare that dissolved at the tree line. The diner kept a stool open for Bob. The church lit a candle on the anniversary and snuffed it when the wax surrendered. At home, Bob edited days into survivable segments. Morning. Coffee, a walk by the river, a glance at the bulletin board where yard sales still bloomed. Afternoon. Shift, and the long hour afterward when a clock feels personal. Evening. A votive, and a notebook where he listed names so he could thank people again without repeating himself. When the hallway nightlight burned out, he replaced it within minutes. Small light against big dark. Jennifer dated without feeling disloyal. She married later, to a man who understood some anniversaries require quiet. They moved a few streets over. On July evenings, she still heard the street lamp buzz in memory and watched it turn jewelry into signal. She kept a folded flyer behind a cookbook because hiding and keeping can be the same act. Detectives tried tactics that felt new and weren't. Refreshed composites, anonymous tip lines, a local news segment that cut the forest into moody shots and then faded. Polygraphs, if repeated, offered the same thin lullaby. A state lab analyst called once with hope. The report returned with hedges, consistent, not inconsistent. The work mattered morally, if not materially. The best of it was preservation. Seals that held, dates you could read, signatures that matched. By year 5, stalled, hardened into a fact, people used to end conversations. Funding moved like weather, and cold cases took the first chill. A detective who cared learned to say, "We're still working it. with a tone that honored both truth and limits. He spent hours on forever tasks, auditing evidence, photographing labels, duplicating logs. No one earns a parade for chain of custody, but the future lives or dies on that handwriting. The brothers' low-variance living deepened into a portrait that could pass any glance. A child's little league game, a donated cake at a spaghetti supper, a wave that used the whole arm. Boring on purpose, they learned to live in the town's peripheral vision, and the town let them. If anyone said their names with Shannon's, it came wrapped in softeners. They were wild back then. People change. It's been so long. 8s. On the 9th vigil, a mist turned each candle cup into a ship in fog. The pastor didn't pray. He read a psalm and folded the program like a man closing a letter to no address. Bob set his candle down and did not let go. The wax found his skin. He accepted the sting as proof that nerves still worked. A new detective, young enough that the case was older than he was, shook Bob's hand with quiet of someone who understands the weight he is lifting. "We keep everything," he said, not as promise but practice. Behind him, a file cart waited. A box on top bore a fresh sticker and a label. Somewhere beneath cardboard and tape lay envelopes that would one day speak in a vocabulary Newego did not yet share. Time doesn't heal, time preserves. The long winter didn't end with a confession. It shifted when a cart of gray boxes rolled into a spare room and someone decided procedure is courage. A paper sign above the folding tables said what everyone knew but needed to read. Chain of custody, lives or dies on ink. Gloves snapped. A camera blinked. Pens scratched names, dates, and times with patient, monkish care. Passion stayed outside the door. Process spoke first. Inventory came before insight. Every seal was photographed before it was cut. Each envelope's label was checked against the thing inside. Rows were squared, labels faced one direction, because memory rounds corners and procedure keeps them sharp. A misaligned date earned a note and a fix, not a shrug. In this room, neatness wasn't optics. It was a promise to the future. You reopen a box and it exhales a decade. Digitization followed. Reports fed through scanners and returned as searchable files. Hissing cassettes yielded clean audio. Words were transcribed, time stamped, and matched to their original forms. Photographs were reshot under neutral light, so pine needles couldn't impersonate shadows. On a widescreen, a timeline assembled itself. July 18th, apartment, soda run, ride, September, forest recovery, then years of measured attempts. Seeing it stacked turned myth into map. Fresh eyes ran that map and refused the narcotic of certainty. Everyone knew where gravity pooled, around the brothers, which is exactly why the team began at the edges. Who else crossed Shannon's path that week? Which side streets could a sedan take to dodge attention? Which facts had hardened merely because decent people repeated them? Confirmation bias feels like momentum from inside. Procedure straps a harness on it. Blind synopses, names redacted, forced reviewers to weigh behavior, not reputation. On cold case files, the rule is simple. Keep every scrap, keep every promise. In this room, it wasn't branding, it was a thermostat. When adrenaline spiked, the line cooled the air. When fatigue crept in, it warmed resolve. Scraps mattered. A partial tire impression saved in a photo before rain, a soil core lifted from a scuff, threads teased from a seam and preserved like paragraphs. Promises mattered more. To a father who kept showing up, and to a town that learned to smile past a scar. The evidence locker became a chapel with a liturgy of documentation. Paper sacks emerged in sequence, opened as if waking witnesses. Clothing that once carried a life now carried time, hairs caught in stitching, microfibers nested where friction lived, the forest grit folded into cuffs. Each opening was photographed, described, resealed, and signed so the second opening could be proven as clean as the first. When someone found the square handwriting of a retired detective, the room went quiet, honoring both his care and the years that had not been wasted. Packets to the state lab were built like arguments. The questions were tight and testable. Can any hair now yield nuclear or mitochondrial DNA? Do recovered microfibers correspond to upholstery lines used in the brothers' model year range? Could mineral signatures separate soil from the hole in the woods from nearby cutovers? The cover letters avoided leading language. A negative result still mattered. It trimmed branches and kept the trunk honest. Couriers carried those packets like lanterns. No one promised miracles. A senior detective said it aloud so hope wouldn't masquerade as proof. New science promises new attempts, not automatic truths. Hope was allowed at the table. Certainty waited in the hall. The expectations were tempered. Anticipation was not. Re-interviews began, not prosecutions. Repairs. Time changes risk math. 19-year-olds who once feared retaliation now had mortgages and children whose faces recalibrated courage. Detectives arrived with empathy and precision. Not your theory, they'd say. Your senses. What you saw, what you heard, what you smelled. One lane at a time. Memory manufactures plot, senses anchor fact. Jennifer returned and placed the same story on a new table. This time she emphasized the micro-pause before the wave, the way Shannon's shoulders hitched for a heartbeat, as if instinct tugged at courtesy. The team didn't mythologize it. They stapled it to a known pattern. Normative trust weaponized by familiarity. The clerk at the store remembered late-night radio, murmuring at 11:45 p.m. A neighbor corrected his phrasing. Not a honk, an idle, and the soft thwup of a door. Tiny repairs sharpened the silhouette. The skeptic mapped other routes with disciplined stubbornness. Could an unknown intersect by chance, abduct, dump, and frame? Could a third name from the old file slip into focus now? He ran ER logs for late-night injuries, checked salvage yards for passenger seat swaps, and hunted a garage invoice that might list seat repair in late summer, '89. His memos produced few headlines and a lot of confidence that theory had been trimmed with a clean blade. Meanwhile, the tech crew curated memory. A relational database turned people, places, vehicles, objects, and times into nodes and lines. Hover. Ring absent at scene. Detail withheld from public. Click. A photograph of a right hand bare under pine dust. Hover elsewhere. Vehicle search. 1989. No blood fluoresced. Fibers collected and stored. The software accused no one. It remembered perfectly and made forgetting difficult. Letters went to retirees who had once breathed this case like weather. Some replied with marginalia, only time can deliver. A local nickname for the clearing, the habit one brother had of wearing work gloves in July, the deputy who kept extra seals in his breast pocket. One breadcrumb led to a storage unit where old garage records sat in bankers' boxes. Inside was an invoice, passenger seat repair, late summer '89, $19 and change. Not a shout, a tap on the glass. At every turn the creed held. Method over myth. No crowning of villains, only the tracing of vectors. A young detective caught herself typing. It has to be backspaced, and wrote. It appears that, subject to laboratory confirmation. Less cinematic, more useful. Precision is boring right up until the day it isn't. Afternoon sun slid across the tile while printers hummed out clean copies of old pain stabilized by new stewardship. The cart that once carried sheet cakes for farewells now ferried binders for beginnings. The case remained cold by the only metric that counts, no warrant yet, but warmer than it had been in years. It had attention, routine, and a clock again. While the lab works, voices start loosening. Re-interviews begin with a pressure drop, the sense that the past still has business. Detectives return without theatrics. Photographs that don't accuse, timelines that ask permission, and a quiet that lets memory step forward. People who once offered tidy summaries edge toward details. A porch bulb that flickered, a song leaking from a dashboard, the idle of a car that lingered too long. At each door, the questions stay small. Did you see her? Did you hear a car? What time? What color? Memory is shy in public. It steps out when the room steadies and the pens stop trying to help. Lindsay Bradley does not rush. Years have sorted what she can say from what she can survive. She meets them in a windowed room. She was seeing Paul off and on after 1989. She remembers the car's smell, smoke, vinyl, the sugary ache of spilled soda, and an ashtray crowded with randoms. Then a class ring. She lifted it while he pumped gas and traced the engraving. S. S. And the year. 89. When he slid back behind the wheel, she asked whose it was. He said he found it. She said that sounded like something you return. He shrugged. Later, pressed again, he said, almost bored, she's probably dead. Eights. The words sat in the car like a third passenger. Fear made them light, then heavy, then nothing, because nothing is the easiest weight to carry. Lindsay wrapped the moment like a sharp object. Covered so it wouldn't cut, stuffed in a drawer she wouldn't open, renamed a bad joke from a man who enjoyed the taste of shock. Years dulled the edge, not the point. Now, saying it aloud, she watches the room tighten as if the air has learned to listen. Detectives ask mechanics, not morals. Which hand held it? Where were you parked? Who else might have seen? She sketches a map. The station, the green canopy, a storm shelf building over the strip mall. She remembers the ring's flat face catching a stripe of late light through window grime, the initials too personal to be random, the feeling of standing near a truth and letting it go, because keeping the peace felt safer than keeping the fact. Fear erodes. Slowly, then faster, like a shoreline giving up sand. It isn't that the town grew brave, it's that the men who enforced quiet aged into other obligations. Tempers that once wrecked nights nursed backs and reputations. A few moved away. Others learned intimidation doesn't spend at the school fundraiser. Conscience begins to compete. It doesn't always win, but it shows up. Lindsay's account doesn't walk alone. Old coworkers remember Paul keeping the car meticulously ordinary, vacuumed but not detailed, cheap seat covers like penance for stains no one else could see. A cousin mentions a late-night hose down in a yard that never hosted barbecues. A neighbor recalls a porch light that never used to matter until a door opened at 2. A0A, M, and 2 figures went in without words. None of it is proof. All of it is gravity. Detectives, trained to distrust pattern, build scaffolding instead of statues. They corroborate small things. The canopy was green. The pumps used carbon slips. The ashtray in that model popped straight up and out. In a storage unit, they find a receipt. Passenger seat replacement. Late summer, 89, $19 and change. You can feel a room change when a detail lands. Lindsay sees it when she mentions the engraving and the light across it. The detectives don't cheer. They underline ashtray, mark the time, and point to a phrase they have guarded for years. Ring absent at scene. Small-town pressure has better PR than conscience. It wears neighborliness like armor. Don't make trouble. Don't invite the past to dinner. But regret leaks through seams. A bartender admits the brothers drank elsewhere for a stretch, then returned as if bored with caution. A clerk who once said jerks, not killers, stops at not this time. A man who swore he remembered nothing volunteers he loaned out a tarp for one weekend only and didn't see it again until the next season. Each fragment clicks against the others until silence sounds different. Procedure contains the flood. Every statement gets a timestamp and a cross-check. The team resists its own hopes with steady hands. Lindsay is thanked, not celebrated. Memory is a witness, not a verdict. She accepts a possible subpoena. Timelines tighten. The ashtray memory pulls corroboration. A station attendant recalls a woman turning a ring while a man smoked. A friend remembers Paul calling it just found. Neighbors retell the summer in fragments, water on concrete at odd hours, trunks shut too carefully, seat covers appearing between Friday and Monday. No single piece carries the case. Weight accumulates because it has nowhere else to go. Outside, the town keeps its choreography. Hardware bell, river gloss, a late train at the edge of lights. Inside, a whiteboard collects verbs called, checked, scanned, requested, and nouns, invoice, ashtray, engraving, canopy. The story breathes more evenly when nouns behave. It becomes less rumor and more shape. A detective types a line and catches herself writing. This has to be, then backspaces to. This appears to be, subject to laboratory confirmation. Habit fights impatience. Craft wins. The mind wants a crowned villain. The case wants accumulation disciplined by doubt, so the paper will carry more than fury. Then the science speaks, and it doesn't stutter. Now, the lab does not announce a miracle. It sends a plain email with a case number in the subject line and a paragraph that makes a room hold its breath. A hair recovered from Shannon's clothing yields a nuclear profile suitable for comparison. A second hair, degraded by time, still carries mitochondrial signatures readable against maternal lines. The language is careful, the meaning is not. Profiles exist. They will be compared. Technicians who spent years saying no now say what matters most. Yes, we have signal. Chain of custody photos are reopened, then closed and signed again. Swabs and tape lifts long dismissed as too old step into 21st century light. The report pairs science with humility, alleles present at specific loci, partial but probative. A separate packet brings fibers teased from a seam in the victim's jeans and from the interior hem of a shirt. Under polarized light, microfilaments glow. Their cross-sections are measured and sketched, their refractive indices noted like coordinates on a map. Meanwhile, the database churns. Samples from old interviews come back out of retirement with signed permissions where needed and warrants where not. Reference swabs are compared. Somewhere between fluorescent hum and the patience of a Monday, the first match lands. The male profile on a hair recovered from Shannon's garment compares to Paul. Statistical weight expressed the way labs talk about certainty, a number so large it swallows a universe. The second hair's mitochondrial profile is consistent with Matthew through the maternal line he shares. It is not the thunderclap of Hollywood. It is the quiet click of a lock that finally fits a key. You can almost hear the binders turn into fingerprints. The fibers add their own testimony. Spectra align. The microfilaments from Shannon's clothing share chemical and morphological features with upholstery used in a narrow band of the brothers' vehicle class for late 80s models. For years, that car was rumor's prop. Now it is chemistry's stage. The report stops short of saying, "this car," because good science refuses to pretend. It says what it can. These fibers are consistent with material used in that make and period, and inconsistent with common alternatives found locally at the time. Investigators don't need poetry. They need direction, and the direction points to a cabin where a girl once leaned into a seat and trusted the night. Adrenaline arrives with teeth. The team feels it in the clatter of pens and the way coffee cools untouched. This is the dangerous moment. The human brain wants a sprint when the work requires a metronome. They slow themselves with ritual. Read the result. Read it again. Pull the case law. Mark the weak points aloud. Someone sets the standard. We proceed as if we're wrong until the paper can survive a stranger's anger. Warrants are drafted with caution layered into every line. Places to be searched, items to be seized, and the explicit ties between probable cause and each drawer, closet, shed, and trunk. The ring becomes an active target, not a ghost. For 25 years, it lived as a whisper in the file. Ring absent, private detail, do not release. Now it is a destination clause. If recovered, it will be photographed in situ, bagged by gloved hands, and measured to the engraving. S. 89 is more than a memory. It is geometry. The affidavits include language to secure jewelry containers, keepsake drawers, storage units tied to either brother, and any photograph or digital image cataloging trophies, the way some men catalog fish. A ring in a box is one kind of confession. A ring posed in a picture is another. A prosecutor sits with them and pours water on anything that smokes. What will the defense say? Becomes the drumbeat. Chain of custody? Tight. Lab methodology? Validated and documented. Alternative sources for fibers? Addressed with specificity. Supplier lots, model years, and regional distribution in place at the time. The aim is not to win an argument in a hallway. It is to build a narrative of careful inevitability for a judge who has seen both sloppiness and swagger. The judge will get neither tonight. They make a map of the brothers' spaces. Current and prior addresses, outbuildings, vehicles, and the storage unit a cousin forgot to mention until last week. They list personnel by skill, entry, search, documentation, family liaison. Redundancy is assigned the way climbers rig a second rope. A photographer will shoot before touch. A video operator will trail every room with unblinking context. One detective gets a job that looks small and is not. Log every drawer, every box, every container, even if empty. So, absence becomes evidence too. The lab adds one more paragraph before the folders close for the night. A microfiber collected in 1989 from the back panel of Shannon's shirt contains a pigment variant used in a single upholstery supplier's lot for a 6-month period. Records tie that lot to regional dealers who sold into Newaygo County. It is not a serial number. It is not a license plate. But it narrows the river to a channel. The team reads the line twice without smiling. They underline the date instead. Discipline has a sound. Quiet and square. Phones go face down. A senior detective checks his own eagerness like a pilot reading instruments against intuition. He has chased cases that looked perfect and turned into smoke. This one feels different because it refuses to offer a single throne for certainty. It is a chorus. Hair, fiber, timeline, ring. When the chorus sings, you do not solo. You conduct a meeting at 3, U0 p.m. becomes a rehearsal for dawn. They script language. Clear, audible, unambiguous. They plan for resistance and for none, for children in the house and for dogs that bite. They choose the hour when most men are slowest and least armed with alibis. Doors will open to a warrant and a calm voice. If the ring is there, someone will feel the weight of an entire town in a small, cold circle. Out in the evidence room, the boxes that breathe decades are resealed, labeled with today's date, and returned to their shelves, not because the case has cooled again, but because the case is finally hot enough to require patience. The measure of readiness is not appetite. It is paperwork that reads like rails. When a judge signs, it will be because every sentence points forward and no word leans on wish. The knock is scheduled for when houses breathe slow. 5 in the morning is when houses forget themselves. Coffee makers haven't clicked alive. Dogs still bargain with sleep. The air is blue and thin. Even a whisper can sound like a verdict. 2 teams idle on separate streets. Engines off. On each porch, a knocker waits for the soft entry. 3 measured raps. Names read calm and clear. A warrant held where eyes go first. At the first address, blinds shiver. A hallway bulb warms from amber to white. The door opens to a face expecting annoyance, not consequence. State Police, the lead says. We have a warrant. Inside, a television blue washes a quiet room. A laundry basket crouches under a framed fishing pier. Last night's smoke hangs. The man, older now, less swagger, more weight, lets the fact arrive. Plastic cuffs whisper quietly. A detective reads charges for the record. Kidnapping, murder, the name that matters. He does not ask. Who's Shannon? His eyes flick once toward the hallway, then to the raised floorboard. Not shock. Choreography. At the second address, rhythm matches within seconds. A porch light blinks awake. A woman gathers a robe, assembling an explanation. The suspect appears at the hall's end, pausing as if distance could thin the uniforms. The cuffs catch. He studies the zip tie like a man who prefers puzzles. He reaches for neither innocence nor outrage. Silence is the script. Search teams move with patience that denies adrenaline. Before a drawer opens, photographs pin the room. Angles, distances, the cone of a lamp on a bedside rug. Inventory slows the blood. Top drawer. A detective calls, and the photographer leans in to catch the discreet world where people keep essentials and secrets. Socks, a wallet, a pocket knife, coins, then a small unmarked box, thumb worn at the edges. The room narrows. Gloved hands lift it and hold for the camera. The lid opens with the courtesy of an old hinge. Inside, a ring waits in its private weather. Thin tarnish and corners, a flat face that once gleamed in hallways and parking lot light. Engraving on the band. S. 89. The shutter clicks. Someone exhales. You can hold a confession. It's cold and fits on your thumb. Down the hall, a child's door stays closed. An officer stands there like a comma. In the kitchen, the woman sits with a mug that has known better mornings. She asks to call someone. She can. She asks what happens next. A detective sketches process, booking, counsel, initial appearance. In the first house, a closet yields a shoebox of pocket trash, ticket stubs, a dead watch, keys to a car long gone. No photographs of the ring. No journal to narrate what science already has. Control wasn't kept on paper. It sat 30 inches from sleep. The trophy dynamic isn't peacocking. It is management, an object to open and close when anxiety pricks. Riding in the back of cruisers. Posture testifies. Oh, the first suspect leans back, face set to neutral. It reads like a poorly wiped screen. The second tilts forward a degree, Calculation without cooperation. Flat affect fools neighbors, not detectives. Honest shock disorganizes speech. At the post, intake is squares and signatures. Personal effects cataloged, calls logged, photographs under light that forgives nothing. In the interview room, the camera's red dot steady watches. Attorneys are notified. Counsel will be present. Until then, talk is administrative. Name, date of birth, address. A detective recites Miranda in a tone that has delivered births and condolences. Evidence rides separately. The ring, bagged and tagged, earns a seatbelt, half joke, half vow. At the property room, the custodian signs. A tech photographs the engraving at higher resolution. The letters stand up under magnification. Reporters bloom at the station's edge. A sergeant says almost nothing, only that arrests were made in connection with the 1989 death of Shannon Siders. That evidence was recovered. That updates will come in court. He refuses the ring's name and the theater of relief. He thanks the public for patience measured in years. Elsewhere, Bob sits at his table and hears the phone he has hated and needed for 25 summers. "We've made arrests," a detective says. "We recovered something important." Bob's hand finds the table's edge. He doesn't ask which something. Some details must walk slowly. Back at the houses, searches finish as they began. Photographs, signatures, the quiet that follows thorough work. A neighbor watches from a driveway and tells herself a story about law and order. The alternative is chaos, and she has a shift at 9. Inside, a detective sweeps low. Baseboards, underlips of drawers, behind the kick plate. Absence can be the loudest thing in a room. The suspects move to holding. The ring sleeps for the first time in a bag that belongs to everyone. The chain of custody form accrues a small family of names. Someone orders breakfast sandwiches no one tastes. Paperwork overtakes adrenaline. Victory tries to stand. Professionalism asks it to sit. By mid-morning, the town's group text rewrites itself. Some messages bless, some curse, some ask whether monsters look like neighbors. The river shines the way rivers do when asked to hold too much reflection. In evidence, a technician hums while printing labels, because labels are rails. Back in interview rooms, counsel sits. The first suspect studies the tabletop as if it might surrender a narrative. The second watches the camera lens like a mirror he can mute. Questions begin with clockwork basics. Where they slept, who was home, whether items require special handling. Answers arrive as shapes, not lines. Demeanor reads aren't verdicts, but they sketch intentions. Flat line, low voice, minimal blink, refusing to give the room a pulse, measured cadence, long pauses, fussy corrections, grasping for control where none exists. Detectives neither pounce nor prod. They harvest small tells and let silence do half the work. Outside, clouds climb like scaffolding. The day that began in blue settles into ordinary weather. Ordinary will carry the case now. Ordinary provenance, ordinary forms, ordinary hearings. The ring waits under glass in a lab where the air is filtered and the lights run cool. Its measurements match records as if metal remembers its owner. The engraving shines. A camera blinks a final frame. Somewhere, in a house that used to be safe, a drawer is closed forever. Now the story has to stand up in court. The courthouse smells like floor polish and nerves. Morning light cuts clean shapes on the pews. Nuego has come to watch. Retired teachers, off-shift deputies, the bait shop owner who remembers the grape gum, reporters with legal pads stacked like shingles. Bob sits in the front row with Jennifer, both wearing the kind of composure you practice alone. The defendants enter with the studied blankness of men who have rehearsed not reacting. Trials begin in miniature. The judge lays ground rules that sound ordinary and sacred at once. The prosecutor sketches a promise. You will hear how a July night narrowed into a car, how a forest kept its ledger, how evidence preserved by discipline grew a voice. The defense counters. Years distort memory. Science can mislead. Coincidences aren't crimes. Jurors watch, hands folded, calibrating the smell of polish into the smell of work. Chain of custody becomes a character. A technician walks the jury across seals like stepping stones. This bag logged on this date by this officer, this signature when reopened, this photograph before the next layer was lifted. At first it sounds fussy, like a librarian counting spines. By the third item, the purpose shows. If the path is clean, the destination can be trusted. Then the ring arrives. The clerk carries the exhibit with the care a detective used to find it. Gloved hands, a box, the slow reveal. Under the document camera, the engraving grows enormous. S. 89. The prosecutor doesn't sermonize. Was the missing ring publicly disclosed in 1989? No. Who knew? Investigators and immediate family. Where recovered? A bedside drawer. The room goes so quiet you can hear air conditioning think. Science follows in measured shoes. A lab analyst explains nuclear DNA with a tone that refuses dazzle. Loci light on a screen. Numbers look like coordinates but name identity. What does the match mean? The probability of a random unrelated person matching is astronomically small, he says, then translates astronomically into a ratio the jury can feel. A second analyst covers mitochondrial DNA, why maternal lines matter, and what consistent with does and does not claim. The humility lands. Here is what the data can say. Here is what it cannot. Fibers take the stand next. A materials scientist describes cross-sections, refractive indices, and a pigment variant tied to supplier lots for late 80s upholstery. She never says, this exact car. She says, consistent with and inconsistent with, pointing away from common alternatives and toward the model range the brothers drove. The defense tries to widen the window. Others owned cars like this. Correct, she says. Which is why we use consistency and exclusion rather than brand names. 8. Narrative through evidence takes shape in the jurors' notebooks. Last seen entering a familiar sedan. Body recovered in the hole in the woods. Ring absent then. Recovered later from a bedside drawer. Hairs yielding profiles that point. Fibers that map an interior. A seat repair receipt. And the ashtray memory that should not exist in a world where innocence is the weather. Lindsay sits brave under the fluorescence and repeats her line without theater. He said, she's probably dead. The defense calls it dark humor. The jurors write it down anyway. You wait for the foreman's voice like a held breath. Jury cognition isn't magic. It's pattern under rules. The prosecution doesn't bet on a single smoking gun. Instead, they braid strands, biology, chemistry, behavior, time. One strand can snap, a braid distributes force. The defense tugs at single fibers. The unreliability of polygraphs back then, the limits of human recall, the possibility of innocent transfer. The braid holds because it never promised perfection, only convergence. 12 people who don't share friends or history learn to share a standard. Bob is both witness and weather. He tells the jury about a ring dish left empty and a hallway nightlight he replaced by reflex. He does not cry on cue. Jennifer repeats the last easy wave under a street lamp, the trust that passed for safety. She is, in that moment, both 18 and older than everyone, Jurors watch her mouth form words and then look at the defendants the way people look for reflections in a dark window. Closing arguments narrow the river. The prosecutor says, "We are not asking you to guess. We are asking you to recognize what happens when independent lines point to the same address." He taps the ring box without opening it. That's not coincidence. That's control. The defense warns against the seduction of story. You are being shown a narrative. Beware the comfort of plot. He holds up reasonable doubt like a blanket. The prosecutor returns once more. Doubt must be reasonable, not speculative. The law requires proof, not poetry. Deliberations don't take days. They take the time required to turn notes into shared belief. Someone draws a timeline. Another adds arrows for fibers and hairs. One juror draws a small box and writes "ring," so no one forgets the geometry of control. They reread instructions. They test each word against each piece. The map tightens until nothing loose can pass for doubt. Back in the courtroom, the defendants face forward with cultivated neutrality. Lawyers touch pens to legal pads without writing. Bob holds the edge of the bench. Jennifer inhales high in her chest. The judge asks whether a verdict has been reached. "Yes, Your Honor." The form is passed. The judge reads silent first, then aloud. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty. The words are simple and catastrophic for the men who receive them. There is no cheer. Relief changes pressure, and people breathe. A sound escapes Jennifer, half sob, half air finally leaving the room. Bob doesn't pump a fist. He bows his head. The defendant's faces glitch, something between disbelief and the discovery that an old script no longer cues applause. Sentencing follows in due course. Life without parole reads bureaucratic until you picture the sunlight in the hole in the woods partitioned into hours these men will never walk through again. The judge's voice stays even. The law, which once seemed slow, now shows its particular speed. Yeah, outside, microphones find Bob. He says almost nothing about victory. He thanks procedure, patience, and people who didn't stop looking. For Newaygo, cold case files became an ethic, justice refrigerated, not forgotten. It honors the boring heroism that solved the case. Labels, seals, timelines that didn't flinch. The town absorbs the verdict like a healed fracture rediscovering weight. The diner has a quiet night where regulars talk about seat covers and ashtrays like plot points from a film everyone watched alone. Parents hold their kids an inch longer. Jennifers everywhere consider the moment between instinct and courtesy and choose differently. Back in evidence, a clerk moves a box from one shelf to another. The label gets a new sticker. Solved. Inside, the ring rests in its bag like a meteor cooled to rock. The chain of custody form has run out of lines. Someone staples a fresh page. Procedure, which never asks for applause, gets one small moment of stillness instead. People exhale, but they also look over their shoulders. The courthouse doors swing open to afternoon wind. A box moves from cold to solved, but absence doesn't vanish. A box moves from cold to solved, but absence doesn't vanish. It changes costume. It stops arriving as dread at 3A. Anne starts sitting beside you at breakfast, a companion that lets you finish your coffee. In Newaygo, justice did not refill what was taken from Bob Siders. It gave him a different engine. Rage, which once burned hot and aimless, learned to power something that could move. They named a path after his daughter. The Shannon Siders Memorial Trail begins at the edge of the Manistee National Forest and threads toward water where the pines thin and the river finds light. On summer mornings, Walkers carry cups and talk low. On snow days, boots write small sermons in white. There's a sign with careful words. A life honored, a community thanked, a promise renewed. Someone tied a ribbon in school, colors around a post, and replaced it when weather frayed the first one. The trail is not a shrine. It is a promise you can walk. Bob walks there early, a figure who prefers shadows to applause. He pauses where the trees open and reads the names on the donor plaque, as if each one is a rung on a ladder back to the surface. He sets up tables for other families, coffee, notepads, tissues, quiet, and explains what patients can and cannot do. He shows them how to store grief without letting it rot everything around it. He tells the unglamorous truth. Labels matter, dates matter, and keeping the number of the evidence clerk matters more than hope without records. A foundation bears his daughter's name. Small checks pay for retesting in cases where evidence survived, but budgets did not. Larger grants underwrite digitization, so files stop living in boxes and start living in databases that never sleep. Bob becomes a broker for attention, the rarest currency in law enforcement. He knows who to call in Lansing, who can move a sample to the top of a list without toppling fairness, and which chief will open the evidence room because he respected the case long before anyone held a camera on him. Statewide, the ripple becomes policy. The Siders case proves that preservation is not romance, it is infrastructure. County boards vote for cold case lines instead of platitudes. Backlogs dent as labs hire analysts who have the patience of gardeners and the habits of watchmakers. A pilot program pairs retired detectives with young analysts, so memory and method share a desk. What begins as a memorial becomes a workflow, a cadence of reopen, resubmit, re-interview, repeat. On cold case files, the ethic sounds simple and stubborn. The community learns a new posture. Instead of whispering fear, it practices vigilance without paranoia. Parents teach their kids the difference between courtesy and compliance. The diner hangs a photo of Shannon near the register, not to sell sadness, but to normalize attention. The hardware store keeps a stack of trail maps by the door, so visitors will walk a mile of gratitude before buying sandpaper. At the school, a unit on forensic science sits next to civics. A teacher explains why chain of custody keeps truth from evaporating. Jennifer becomes a voice people trust. She knows how to speak from a wound without using it to win. When she says careful, teenagers listen, because she also says possible. Her child learns that safety is not a bubble, but a network. The neighbor who texts when the porch light is out. The coach who insists on buddy walks. The clerk who notices when a face is off. On the memorial trail, she answers questions from strangers with patient candor. The past stops being an anchor and becomes a compass. In quieter rooms, policy continues to evolve. Crime labs publish turnaround goals and meet them often enough to build faith. A statewide evidence audit locates boxes no one remembered and rescues them from heat and damp. Prosecutors host case preservation nights where volunteers learn to scan, tag, and verify under supervision. None of this makes headlines. All of it changes futures. The vocabulary of justice expands. Not just verdicts and sentences, but maintenance, stewardship, and care. There is honesty in the memorial trail. It admits that nothing brings a daughter home, but it also insists that the living can be worthy of the lost. You walk it with someone you love and say her name, and the pines answer with an old sound that once was terror and now is a reminder to keep your promises. In Newaygo, the phrase cold case files stopped being just a show title and became folk wisdom. If you keep the scraps, the story can still be told. If you keep the promise, the truth can still arrive. You stand at the trailhead where the map fades into green and take the first step, because steps are what the living own. The river carries light. The forest keeps a respectful distance. Somewhere, a kitchen clock ticks like a healed heartbeat. Somewhere, a clerk prints a new evidence label and lines it up square. Somewhere, a young analyst opens an envelope from 1992 and finds a strand that might still speak. Safety isn't the absence of monsters. It's the presence of people who won't stop looking. If this episode of Cold Case Files moved you, subscribe, share Shannon's name, and tell us where you're watching from. Justice may walk, but it walks straight